process was when developing the questions. So we will begin. Good evening. My name is Christy Tatum, and I will serve as your discussion leader for this evening's discussion. I'll introduce myself.
I'm Caroline Fernandez, and I will serve as the devil's advocate today.
Nitil, did you already go? I'm sorry, I heard something when I was.
Nitil Karbi. I'll be the creative connector this evening.
I'm Bindu Sunil. I'll be the reporter.
Okay, all righty. And Nitil has Destin in our group tonight as well. I'm sorry.
Destin is our assistant.
Destin is joining to participate in our discussion tonight as well. Hopefully he enjoys it. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so this is week 8. And the big question for this week is, how does education policy get evaluated? Does education research matter? So our first reading is Conway, 2019, Maximizing Research Use in the World We Actually Live in. Relationships, Organizations, and Interpretation, Education, Finance, and Policy Journal. So for the synopsis, Conway, 2019, analyzes how research influences policy through the decision-making process. The policy decision-making process focuses on policymakers' understanding of research, personal and community values, constituent concerns, budgets, legal constraints, etc. The relational, organizational, and interpretive insight that research provides to policymakers, combined with embedded organizational structures and trusting personal relationships, provides opportunities for policymakers to construct and interpret their understanding of research. Based on this understanding of research, Conway 2019 shares strategies that acknowledge the role of relationships, organizations, and interpretation in helping policymakers use the information garnered more effectively. Question 1. Conway explains the role of networks and professional associations, embedded regional directors, and research practice partnerships in increasing the influence of policy research. Based on your understanding of the article, which strategy promises to have the most significant effect on policy research?
I'll go ahead and start this one here. So the interesting thing about this article was the focus on the relationship piece. And so, for me personally, the piece that really made the most sense to me when we think about the promises that have the biggest effect is just in general. Like, you don't necessarily need to be a part of a professional organization to experience success. We don't need to always rely on this third outside party, this third organization to create the desired outcomes that we need. We don't always need. And so for me, it's more so on relying on the person that's next to you. It's that interdependency within your role that can lead to you experiencing the kind of success that you need. And so when I read this, I started to thinking about ants, and I started to think about insects that sacrifice their individual in order to promote the system or the colony. And my creative connection for this text is just the strength and the reliability and the system's mindset that insects have, And so Conway has a quote. He says, "If we want research to matter for policy, we need to devote resources to building relationships and strengthening organizational practices in service of building organizations that learn." And if any of you have ever had a problem with ants or roaches, they learn. They know how to learn. They know how to survive. They know how to cope. They know how to adapt. And, in order to, build that kind of culture, I think that speaks to the level of codependence that the world of insects really have with each other, and that was kind of my creative connection for this piece is just, like when you notice how how different animals, kind of react. They depend on each other. And so that's kind of what I got out of this text here.
Well, as a devil's advocate, I'm going to jump in because I completely agree and disagree with everything you said. And so you had me in the point about building those relationships. And I found a quote from Conway. He says, the most effective way to build systematic capacity to learn is to sustain connections across organizations and people. And so for me, where I completely disagree is that there's powers in number, and there's influence when you have these organizations. So being able to share data, to share information and sustain learning and building relationships with like-minded people, that's the way to get a policy and to get research initiated and interest in a specific thing you want to look into. And so for me, I think that you can have the best research in the world, but if you don't have any influence, if you don't have power to encourage people to be interested in the research or to take it up, you might as well have done nothing. So there is power in being a member of these organizations because it's a format, it's a platform for you to be able to share and connect with like-minded people and spark some interest in the research that you're trying to push.
I'm sorry. So for me, I hear you, Natil. I hear you, Caroline, and I'm still, even with you, I'm still in that half and half where I agree with those relationships, but I don't think it gets, I agree with Natil saying about the networks and the professional associations. I think the strongest strategy to me, based on the reading, is those research practice partnerships. Because as they say, it's a long term. I'm on page 6. Conway says that they're defined, well, it's actually Coburn and Pennell, I guess you say. They're defined as long-term collaborations between practitioners and researchers that are organized to investigate problems of practice and solutions for improving schools and districts. To me, that's the strategy that I feel like you will get more change because it's a long-term relationship. I'm in an association and I'm not active in the association. I don't do as much in association. So when you're in an association, you have a few who may push their own individual agendas. Whereas here, this is this long-term partnership, and in this partnership, they're working together, and it's an organized partnership where they're looking at problems and solutions. They have the specified problems and solutions, and sometimes in those organizations, they focus on things that will benefit their members and not just like globally, And so when reading this, I'm like, the Federation. I'm just going to use AFT, I think that's what it is, American Federation of Teachers. When I was at Sutton, they didn't like my principal. So a lot of the AFT members got together and they was like, we're going to get her out. And AFT came in, they wrote this long letter and they was like, you don't do this, 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 and this. We demand this, 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 this. And then I had a person, because I'm a member of GAE, said, you do know that your principals and stuff, they're a member of organizations as well. We have no real power. So sending her that letter, nothing's really going to change. And to this day, my old principal is still at the school. So I think that the research practice partnerships are more, it's more stable and stuff because you have that backing with that partnership. But I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bindu.
No, this is, such a great start, like Natil bringing in ants into the picture, along with Destin, that's awesome. And then Caroline, just having the devil's advocate about, having relationship within organization, even how it's really important to get other organization in. And Christy, I totally agree with you. I can see the point of the RPPs, the research practice partnerships is so important. I was quite surprised by this article and then I looked at it's 2019, so it's very recent, right? And then as a research director, she bringing in her expertise of working in Massachusetts Department of Education for 10 years and coming. I was so pumped just reading this. And then her idea about research broker, how important that person is in connecting the policymakers and the researchers. I thought that was very, very interesting. And to your point, Christy, you mentioned the problem of practice. So it's not like you have a research and having a question, but you're looking at what does the policy need? What is the problem we need to solve? So it's from the lens of problem solving, and how do we bring in these research to solve the problem that is related to policy in order to bring changes. So I was thinking how also they were intentionally organized to build relationships. We all agree relationships are so important. And I was thinking like, what? We only have one conference that brings researchers and implementers together. And so think about if these two groups come together and make decisions about how to solve problems, and they bring their own perspectives, expertise, and I think we will have better success in implementing and policies. So great question. Thank you, Christy.
Yeah.
Great question.
I was gonna say that to me.
Your
It's kind of counterintuitive. Like as a person of science, I just don't understand how you make decisions, how you have one organization that's brokering these relationships between the researchers and the policymakers. And it just boggles my mind that policy is passed without having a thorough analysis and research to support it sometimes, just like, ugh.
And I think she also talked about internal roles. So when I was in APS, we had research department with a lot of research analysts. We have all these curriculum departments, but you know what is interesting? How much they talk to each other. Because research, the APS, they're getting research information from outside, but I bet they're not talking, because when I interacted with the research analysts, our departments were not talking to each other. That's interesting.
Yeah, like that's my only counter to what Caroline was talking about is more doesn't necessarily mean better. Like when you have more chefs in the kitchen, potentially, you can get the order done quickly. But there's also a lot of, you gotta learn each other. You gotta know this. Now you're introducing more politics, and we're not as focused on the research and the policy. Now, like Christy kind of mentioned, you're bringing in those ulterior motives, right? So not every organization has the capability to scale up. Like start with where you're at. Do a movement where you're at. Do not despise small beginnings. The Bible. AD. BC. Don't do the work where you're at. Not everybody is ready to quite scale up to that next level and join a membership. Because then when you join, how are you going to look? Do you have your stuff together? Are you really? Do you have the capacity to even serve in that role in that organization? These are questions that I have.
Yeah. Well, I will say, and it's not really aligned to the question, but my aha moment was when she was talking about the position she got and how she felt like isolated. And later on down the years, and I was like, wow. So, that was an aha. And I was like, I never thought about that,
Good point. Yeah. I like the analogy of unicorns.
I was just going to say that, Bindu.
Yeah.
All right. Question 2. Smith and Smith, research in the policy process. Handbook of Education Policy Research. So read a synopsis. Smith et al. Analyzed policy decision making based on the following questions. How does research influence policy? When does research influence policy? Why have so many reforms failed to live up to expectations? Why do so many reforms have small effects on education achievement? What are the characteristics of policies with large effects, and how do they differ from policies with small effects? Smith et al. Also explores improving the quality and utility of education research, focusing on causality and external validity. Lastly, Smith et al. makes 4 recommendations for policymakers and researchers and several innovations to impact. That's cute. No, that's the right question. That's good. And several innovations to impact student improvement. Question 2, based on the reading, select one recommendation, one innovation that you believe will positively impact student achievement based on your school, district, or job's target population. Please provide an example of how the innovation will positively impact your target population. And this was one of my favorite questions. I love this question.
Chrissy,
I'm not taking stuff in a minute to what I'm doing, so that's why I love this question.
Yeah, Chrissy always has like a 3-4 part question with it. You know, let me go.
Teacher, I was a language arts teacher.
Yeah. One thing I will say that this article was a tough read for me personally. I feel like it wasn't really focused. But one thing that I will say that kind of stood out to me was the concept of sustained effort over time. Mm-hmm. You know, and if I were to make a creative connection, so to speak, if I were to make that creative connection, it's that drop of water that continues to hit the rock, you know, that has like a little crack in it. So, excuse me, if you know, when the droplet continues to hit the rock over and over and over and over and over consistently, you know, the crack is going to get wider and eventually the rock is going to split. So it's that concept of sustained effort, you know, persistence. And according to, you know, Smith and Smith, it takes time to put any reform in place and to implement it well. And in general, in teaching, we expect too much too soon. Right, we want the turnaround quickly for like a new intervention. And one thing that I brought up is here in education, we have like a microwave mentality instead of a crock pot mentality. You know, like we just want to go ahead and do, you know, 30 seconds in the microwave, boom, boom, we're done. Boom, boom, we have achievement. You know, let's go ahead and do this after school remediation for 2 months and then expect, you know, level 1s to move to level 3s on the milestone. That's not the case. You know, we need to take a crock pot approach where we're a little more intentional with our ingredients. You know, it's a slow cook. You're making sure the food is absorbing the materials that are in there, so you have a rich taste afterwards. We ain't doing all of that in education. We are not taking the time to really add seasoning to what we're doing and just kind of letting it sit. And so what I do like about the article is, you know, they talk about how can we improve our instructional practice. And so my solution to that would be action research. You know, we typically don't, you know, come across action research until you're in graduate school. But I think as schools, if we embrace the culture of action research, not a book study, but embrace a culture of action research, right? Where your leadership team, you know, they throw ideas about different things related to, you know, instructional achievement. And then you empower them to do the research and do a study and then come back.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would say we're reading this one. The one recommendation that I'm on page 390. And with looking at my target population, one that really stood out to me is improving the language mastery of students from low-income families. And then it says the relative lack of fluency in academic language of children from low-income families and children who are English language learners has been documented in multiple studies. So we have multiple studies that have documented that this is an issue. Then we had the prescription, which says the research indicates that large percentage of students from all groups learn the skills of reading, such as decoding, phonemic awareness, and reading sight words. Yet, even though these skills are learned, many low-income and English language learners students fail in their comprehension of text at 4th grade and beyond, thus greatly reduces their chances of becoming competent, self-directed learners. That really stuck out because this is, like Natil said, what I'm talking about with my teachers on a daily basis. And they're living in that realm of, let's do some simple decoding. Let's do some sight words. So this really stuck out to me, and I was like, okay, this article is speaking to me. So that's one of the ones I applied to my target population because I was like, it really addresses what I see as a administrator at my school.
I definitely hear, Natil, your point about sustained effort. And even if like your chef example, what happens is we change the course of the recipe or the end result of the dish. Like we don't even go through the entire dish. And listening to you, Christy, like reading, right? We have all this phonemic awareness and you have, and then thinking about comprehension, like what role did comprehension and vocabulary play? So really focusing on instruction, right? And then I was thinking about the 5 dimensions that the author talked about, and I do have to preface this with like I love the historical perspective this article gave. What are the changes that happened from 1965 and how we have changed policy reacted to those responses. But I was thinking about like the 2 things. One is the disruptiveness. Like it's so important that it's disruptive. Otherwise, that we try to do changes by not changing anybody's roles and responsibilities. And I'm watching it right now in the school. That is a turnaround school, and we're supporting it. They don't want to change their practices in the classroom, right? They have knowledge like Montessori works, 2.5 hours of uninterrupted work, and no learning is happening. And then you want to bring in disruptive changes like standard-based instruction, meeting the students where they are, learning targets, and there's so much of pushback because people don't want to change that. So one thing is that disruptive change, and second was flexible. Like it's important that policy has structures, but then is it flexible enough for the local school to change it so that they can accommodate their needs? I feel those 2 are really important. And I was like actually piqued by the innovative idea that the author talked about, health and learning. Now, low income, like I mean, the three suggestions that she gave. One of the things is health, so important, right? And I saw that in APS where the kids, little kids, if they cannot read, there's nobody to take them to doctor. Like, how are they going to learn? So they need classes, and I've seen schools like APs taking the students to the eye doctor to get insurance so that they can have classes. So, great article.
That was a great article. One of the things that I completely agree with everything that you guys are saying, but as I was reading, I was also connecting it to what we read last week and about the importance of language. So there was a part that I really focused on, and I'm trying to find my notes here. But in terms of like the policies being clear and concise, where the language should be flexible. And I think that as school and district leaders, you're developing policy, it needs to have flexibility, because when you have this rigid policy, it can be misconstrued and misapplied. And I really love the piece. I think it's because I'm a big advocate for equity in terms of improving achievement and opportunity for all students. I mean, I think it's my mission in our district is to close opportunity gaps. Looking at our farm kids and saying, hey, our farm kids, are they participating in STEAM? And if they're not, is it because they can't afford the resources that they need to be able to be successful in those classes? And then when you start thinking about who's in these STEAM courses, it's usually the kids who had Lego Mindstorms, the kids who had access to 3D and all these games, that the kids that are from low socioeconomic status, they haven't developed these skills because they can't afford to. So for me, looking into ways to close those opportunity gaps, I think was powerful.
Great.
Okay. Going to question 3, McDonald, repositioning politics and education circle of knowledge. For this question, using figure 2, a conceptual model of policy feedback. Based on a current or previous policy adoption at your school, identify the policy feedback process through the lens of the social construction or political power resources target groups. Based on the feedback and future policy implementations, do you think the policy produced the intended outcome?
I'll go first. So for us, because we are a virtual school, and I'm sure that when you guys went virtual, if you went virtual like over the last 2 years, you guys saw this. One of the biggest challenges was recording attendance and honesty in attendance. So, for us, we don't have mandatory live lesson participation. So our kids didn't have to come into the Zoom room. So we switch our attendance from the number of hours to lesson completion. And so, for example, you could have been in front of the computer for 8 hours, but if you didn't complete a lesson, you were not there today. And we got a lot of pushback, specifically from parents of kids with 504s and special education, because they were like, hey, my kid sat there the whole day and he didn't do anything. And we were like, well, he didn't do anything, he wasn't here. And so it took a lot of community building. It took a lot of training, because even our staff had to get buy-in, because in the beginning, it seemed a little rough. And then we were like, well, no, you need to submit some lessons, and we had to work on it. So for us, we went through the feedback, we submitted surveys, we had outcries from the community, we listened, but at the end of the day, we were like, we're moving forward with this, and this is how it's going to be. And yes, it had the intended, because we're now completely, our attendance is completely based on, course completion. And, this year we've had a lot less complaining than last year, and we have a lot more compliance. We're also seeing better results because the kids are actually, they submit the work. Otherwise, there's no credit for them.
Awesome. I was like, this particular reading was, I was trying to find examples of it, because there was so much going on, right? There were there 4 figures? Yeah. And for they talked about standard base. So I know your question talked about figure 2. And when I was thinking about this, like the organization, like Learning Sciences International, we have Applied Research Center. We have Dylan Williams Formative Center. And we also have Marzano's. So Marzano's tools are more for evaluation, right, of the school. But then when we think about the policy characteristics, when we bring in change, we have all these tools at the hand, but we don't just come in and put it out there. No, we try to work with the school. So we do a first diagnostic walk, and then we think about what are the small incremental changes that the school leadership team is agreeing with. What do they want to see change? And then we bring in. So when we think about rules like institutional structures and rules, it's very participative, going on walk together, looking at what is happening and finding evidence to support your analysis. So when I think about structures and rules, even though we have structures, it's formulated based on what the school's goal is. So learning goals, the goals are crafted together, and then we have timeline and see how it is going. And if the goal is not working, we go ahead and change it. So we just have a new goal. We started focusing on learning targets just because there was no learning happening. And now we found out that it's very, very complicated. So we have now switched to student teaming. So our students even interacting during a lesson. So change the goal. And then when we think about feedback, so when we are going on walks, what are we observing? What do we need to change? Right? So all that conversation happens. And I make it sound easy, but it's not easy, because, sometimes a district purchases this, the school may not even want it. And it's a lot of work. These implementing something. And so we actually found an example of, I know this is a Florida school that jumped from F to A. And when I see that in the news, I'm like, is that real? I don't know. I don't trust that.
I know, that's a lot. I'm sorry.
That's a lot, right? And I'm like, during the pandemic, how did you get that? I think there's something fishy, but whatever. But when we think about the school, we say this is a possibility, because when you have Montessori, you already have kids working together, right? There are great things already in place, but then really to implement it and ensure that it is also how do we increase the coverage, not just 20% of classrooms, but could it be 50% of classroom? And what are the strategies we use? So that's how I thought about policy feedback. And I don't even know if I'm on target here, but I just wanted to share what connections I made.
I was going to say what kind of struck me about Figure 2 is when you look at it, it goes from policy characteristics to institutional structures and rules, and then it breaks off. If you go up, it's interpretive, and then if you go down, it's mobilization, and then towards the very end is future interest. But what I thought was very interesting was that from interpretive, you can go down to mobilization. But you don't go from mobilization to go up to interpretive. Like for me, it seems like the perception of a policy, right? How you interpret it, how you understand it, it seems to be more influential than your actual capacity of mobilizing the resources. Because if they were equal, that arrow should be going in both directions. But it just goes from interpretive down to mobilization. So for me, it seems like the interpretation of your policy seems to weigh more so than your actual capability of getting a coalition involved to implement the policy. And so what I thought was very interesting here, to kind of bring my creative connection is, similar to Christine's example of like a COVID-19 policy. So we had a no field trip policy last year, right? And so,
Caroline.
The policy characteristics of
Caroline, who is Christine?
Oh, my bad.
I was like, who is Christine? I'm confused.
I thought
Yeah.
like,
Like, who is Christine? Like Caroline?
Yeah, so with the no field trip, you had your characteristics of that field trip. You had the rules of banning field trips, but then the perception was very interesting because our athletic department didn't get that message. Football continued to have football, continued to football, basketball continued to basketball, wrestling continued to wrestling. But should we want to have an educational field trip around here? You can't do that.
Yeah.
If we want to focus on instruction, academics, which is the foundation of school, that option is not available to you. But when we have the opportunity to earn some money for the school, conceptually, or maybe athletic, prowess supersedes academic prowess to some people in the community. So what I thought was very interesting is that how did the coaches interpret that policy? Like no field trip, no busing, no transportation, provide your own. However, we're gonna make sure our team gets there. We're gonna make sure our equipment. So that is what I really thought was really, really kind of interesting is how different groups within a school system receive the same rules now, but then they just know that, this right here doesn't apply to me. And I'm going to interpret it like that. I'm going to walk in that and I'm going to act on it. So I thought that was really interesting. Our coaches, they just seem to just, they're Teflon Don. Nothing really affects them. They don't even come to work dressed like they come into work. They come in sweats and short, like no one says anything to them because they're coaches. So I just thought that was interesting.
So for me, with this question, I agree with everything that Till is saying. So, I'm at a new school. So I looked and I thought about what policy, because a lot of the stuff was established, even though we're not getting intended outcome because our school is not moving. We're a DF school. I didn't know 66.3 is a D, but I just found out it's a D and not an F. I thought it was an F. So I wanted to change some policies. So when looking at this, I was like, oh, we know the problem. But then going to what the Till said about that mobilization and interpretive effects, it stops for me. So you can identify the problem. You can have a policy in place. You can even talk about the rules and what the outlines and the participation, who's all participating in the implementation of this policy. But the interpretive effect of my school, my teachers, is that I'm telling them that they can't teach. And I'm like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we need to go to intentional teaching. Because if for the last 5 years we've been D and F, something is not computing correctly. So we can't even get to the mobilization, and we can't even get to future policies because somewhere in there goes back to the social construction of it. Those people, the relationships, what we talking about from that first article, it's a breakdown. So when I wrote this question, I was like, yeah, we can do that. And I was like, wait a minute, I don't. Because even the other policy I tried to implement was our car lane. And they were blocking both sides of the street. I said, we can't block both sides of the street. People were honking their horn. It was a mess. A mess. Anybody can see it was a mess. When I tried to change that, we've been doing this for 10 years. So I feel like some of the best policies that may come out of Washington or the district level, it has good intentions, but the interpretation is really impacted. So I'm even looking at sometimes, I always look at like even No Child Left Behind. It had good intentions, but the interpretation, did we already put up that block? Because like Caroline doesn't say, it was an unrealistic goal. Or, because I think that happens with a lot of our policies. I don't know. I'm sorry. I went on a rant page because I was just like, it was a good question. Then when I tried to implement it, I got to stand still because I don't have the backing like you. You build your capacity, Caroline. You built your capacity so that your policy got that intended outcome. So it really opened my eyes.
Yeah. I think that kind of goes down to your kind of management philosophy. Is it top down or bottom up? And too often teachers are just used to top down. Y'all tell us what to do. To really get that buy-in. That ties into what we were talking about before, Chrissy, right? Sometimes leaders, we ain't got time to, hey, do y'all want to get on the bus? Okay, well, come on. No, we ain't got time for all of that. I need you to handle this. Traffic is messed up. It's an inconvenience for everybody on this road. It is what it is.
My boss implemented the yellow brick road method. And so basically, I'm going to tell you why. We had a whole Wizard of Oz theme going. And she says, look, sometimes I need to move on to Emerald City. And I'm going to leave you guys behind. But you need to trust me that I'm going in that direction and I need to move on. But I understand that sometimes you need to call out Yellow Brick Road because you need me to slow down. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to call Emerald City when I need you to trust me. And you guys say Yellow Brick Road when you need me to slow down.
That's cool.
But in that, because that's why I was like the 2 points I put: the social construction or the political power. Yeah. I feel like the social construction has a heavier weight on policy than the political power.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's why like this interpretive effects is all political.
Yeah.
So sometimes the organization may not even be like they're all ready to do, and it says differential mobilization. So almost think that you have different incentives, different resources based on the needs. Mm-hmm. So if you go there, it's so much more easier to revise your policy. When I think about the school we are supporting, we need this interpretive effect because we are not giving opportunity to certain groups of students. And it's not just this year, it's happened repeatedly. You are looking at the needs and not putting it on top, while the other needs are on top. And I feel that we need to go through that interpretive effects to really understand the social construction, political power, how that is playing an effect on who is noticed and who is not.
Yeah.
And before we come in and distribute the resources or even focus on the targets, because it will not be equal if we don't do that.
And I'm going to take a little slightly different approach in terms of social construction, because I completely agree with it. I think your teacher demographics has so much to do with it, because I'm leading 2 schools and it's almost like night and day. We have one school where the school leader is like young, she's up and coming. The staff is relatively younger, they haven't been there forever. And when we put out a new policy, it's like, yeah, we can try, we can do it maybe. And then in the other school, it's like, that ain't gonna work. And it doesn't work because you said you're not even willing to try. Like you immediately put the shield up and you just decided that you weren't gonna try. And so, you see the difference between, and of course, teachers are, Dr. B said it not in our class, but in the other class. She's like, how do you tell a teacher who's been doing something for 20 years? Like, yeah, I know you've done this for 20 years, but that's not what the research says is correct or the most effective way. And so they shut down to change.
Mm-hmm. And you said that last week. I'm sorry. Caroline said that last week. Remember, you were talking about you feel the younger teachers are more apt to want to change and put. So, yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I
was just going to say there's a quote by Peter Drucker that says culture eats strategy for breakfast. So like y'all, you can have the best strategy, but if the culture is not there, you can have the best seed in the world, but if it's not on fertile ground, it's not gonna sprout.
And I'm gonna add that because I don't want to seem like I'm ageist, but I think I think it's like a state of mind, because I have some older teachers who are just open to try and experiment,
attitude.
So I think it's that personality, that willingness to try. But
yeah.
It'd be nice to do like a study on millennial teachers. Yeah, like on millennial leaders, like that would be pretty interesting to me.
No, but then you see, right? Like a lot of new teachers, like how many teachers are going to stick after 5 years, especially if they don't have mentors, they don't have support, right?
Stick after this year. Stick after this year.
Well, yeah, maybe this year, but in the past it's been higher.
Listen, I was reading this article about mass resignation, and this is like in every field, but I don't think that no field gets it as much as education, because you combine mental health, the amount of work that we do, and the pay is a recipe for people to just quit this year.
Right. Christy, you were frozen. I know you were saying something, but you were frozen for the second, whatever you were saying. Like, we didn't hear it.
Oh, I was wondering if everybody stop that. Can you hear me now? Got me now?
Yes. Yeah.
I was saying I agree with Atil. It used to be 3 to 5, but now I'm in a educators group on Facebook, and this girl, and it's so sad. Yesterday she posted, she said, I just graduated from college. I joined this educators group. It's so disheartening hearing a lot of the teachers saying they want to leave or there are other things to do. Can I get out of education? She was like, I am so afraid to apply for a job right now in education. Because she said, so what should I do?
That's so sad.
Listen, any high school senior or junior, I'm telling them, do not join this. Don't do it. Don't do it. I don't want to be Mr. Sourpuss veteran, but it is what it is, y'all. With the number of jobs that are open, go ahead, support your family. Have that peace of mind first. Because this right here.
But you see, that's why we have to get involved in politics. Because honestly, these people are going to retire, and we are really the next generation that needs to step it up. Because if we don't fight the education, what is going to come up to? I mean, honestly, we are going to lose highly, highly qualified people, because the pay and the stress of teaching is just overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about the article talking about technology, as one of the innovation, like how do, and especially for secondary schools, like how can we use that? So students they have the resources at their fingertips, and they're not dependent on a classroom, a teacher, and they have the opportunity to learn what interests them, Yeah, I'm sure it's going to change. Our education in 10 years is going to be so different. It's not going to look what seems now.
Well, I thought the education would change after the pandemic, and I don't know about your schools, but my school reverted right back to how it was pre-pandemic. Like, I was so excited because we're 1-to-1. But when I tell you my teachers live at the copy machine, I don't get it. I don't get it.
See.
Yeah. So any final thoughts before we close? No, this is a great discussion.